Warren Beatty's wild dating history came with a twist most people never knew about. Behind the charm and movie star looks, he apparently had a secret list, one ranking the women he dated by worst hygiene. From the 1960s through the 1990s, Beatty was linked to nearly every top actress in Hollywood, but what he whispered to his driver after each date is what really shocks people. Michael Reynolds, Beatty's loyal driver from 1965 to 1992, spilled that Warren had the most sensitive nose in Hollywood. The man could supposedly smell a mist shower from across the room. Unlike his friend Jack Nicholson, who bragged loud and proud about his wild nights, Beatty was ice cold and analytical. No emotion, no gossip, just quiet judgment. After every date, Beatty would slide into the back seat of his car, roll down the window, even if it was pouring rain, and sit in silence for a few seconds before dropping his signature review. Reynolds recalled during an interview from his small Sherman Oaks home, then would come the assessment. Beatty might mutter something like, "She hasn't changed her sheets in weeks," or that someone used perfume to hide skipping a shower. Reynolds described him as borderline obsessive when it came to cleanliness. The man showered multiple times a day and threw out shirts after wearing them once. For Beatty, hygiene wasn't just a preference, it was law. If his date didn't meet his ultra-clean standards, she wasn't getting a second ride in that car. Warren Beatty wanted his dates to look and smell perfect, like flawless machines, not real people. Reynolds shook his head, remembering it, saying Beatty couldn't handle any human smells, no morning breath, no signs of a real body. It was totally impossible to meet those standards. But tonight, we're diving into the 5 legendary women who reportedly failed Beatty's extreme hygiene checklist, each one breaking a different rule in his strange private ranking system. These claims come straight from the man who saw it all firsthand, the driver who took them home. And first on that list, Madonna. Her scent, Reynolds said, was a mix of incense, sweat, and ambition. That smell alone could fill a room. During the 1990 filming of Dick Tracy, Beatty and Madonna's chemistry burned hot and fast, a relationship that was just as electric as it was chaotic. Reynolds laughed as he remembered the night of the Dick Tracy premiere at Grauman's Chinese Theater. The pair hit the red carpet looking unstoppable, stayed at the after party for maybe an hour, and then, out of nowhere, Beatty stormed out alone. He slid into the back seat of the car looking totally shaken. For several tense blocks, he said nothing, just stared out the window until finally he spoke. Reynolds remembered that night crystal clear. Beatty leaned back and simply said, "She changes her scent throughout the evening." Reynolds was stunned. Then Beatty broke it all down like he was briefing someone on a secret mission, explaining in crazy detail how Madonna switched perfumes mid-date. He described it like a battle plan, saying she smelled like incense, sweat, and ambition, a combination so strong it practically took over the whole car. From what Reynolds told me, it wasn't that Beatty thought Madonna smelled bad. Not at all. What really got to him was that she treated her scent like strategy, adjusting it on purpose. That threw him completely off balance. For a man who lived by control, over his image, his presence, even his environment, that kind of unpredictable energy shook him. A few nights later, Reynolds was waiting outside Madonna's place when Beatty suddenly stormed out, jacket in hand instead of on his shoulders. Reynolds said Beatty looked tense, almost rattled, muttering that Madonna had sprayed her perfume on his jacket when he wasn't looking. He acted like it was some huge violation, a personal invasion of his private space. Days later, that was it. Done. Their fiery romance fizzled out in record time, and Madonna landed on Beatty's secret mental list of hygiene disappointments. But this time, it wasn't really about being clean or dirty. It was about control. Warren Beatty couldn't handle a woman who played by her own rules. Jane Fonda, the icon of rebellion and revolution, ended up clashing with Warren Beatty in a way no one saw coming. According to Reynolds, Beatty once sighed and said, "She's got a thing against deodorant, and it showed." It was 1971, and Fonda was at the peak of her fame and her political fire, deep into activism and protest culture. When she linked up with Beatty during that era, sparks flew, but not always the good kind. Reynolds remembered it like it was yesterday. "I picked them up for a Vietnam veterans fundraiser in the valley," he said. "It was July, about 95 degrees, and Warren already looked irritated. As soon as they drove off, Beatty leaned forward and complained, 'Reynolds, she refused to use deodorant before a fundraiser in this heat.' Apparently, Fonda had given him a passionate lecture about aluminum and toxic chemicals in hygiene products, which left Beatty completely baffled. Reynolds said Beatty couldn't wrap his head around it. He kept muttering, 'I don't understand how someone can spend hours perfecting her hair for a protest, but refuse basic hygiene products.' It drove him crazy. For someone as obsessively groomed as Beatty, Fonda's all-natural lifestyle wasn't refreshing. It was a full-blown crisis. Over the next few weeks, things went downhill fast. Beatty became more and more fixated on what he called her contradictions, while Fonda stood her ground. Reynolds even saw their final blow-up after another political event. The tension was thick, the air heavy, and the vibe in that car unforgettable. Reynolds said the tension between Warren Beatty and Jane Fonda finally exploded that night. They walked out mid-argument, voices sharp but words muffled. He couldn't catch everything, but he remembered Beatty snapping about natural alternatives, while Fonda fired back something that sounded like American hygiene neurosis. The energy was icy. The two sat in total silence all the way back to Beverly Hills, not a single word between them. Later that night, Reynolds had to drive Beatty alone to a dinner meeting, and the man was still visibly shaken. "Reynolds," he told me, "she called me toxically clean. Can you imagine?" Beatty just couldn't let it go. From what Reynolds gathered, Fonda's so-called offense wasn't about smelling bad. It was about her bold rejection of all the commercial hygiene products that Beatty saw as essential. Her political stance clashed hard with his obsession over control and cleanliness. It wasn't just personal, it hit him at his core. And just as that drama faded, another name from Beatty's past came storming back, Joan Collins. Their chemistry in the late 1950s was legendary, long before Reynolds became his driver. But even decades later, the memory of that relationship still hung heavy over Beatty's senses. Reynolds recalled a night in 1977 when they were heading to an industry dinner where Collins would be in attendance. It was their first time seeing each other in years, he said. Beatty was tense the entire ride, giving detailed instructions. "Keep the car windows open afterward if she comes near it," he ordered. According to Reynolds, Beatty went off on a full breakdown about Joan's chemical warfare level of perfume. He said her scent could knock a man out. Even years later, her signature fragrance still haunted him. Reynolds said Beatty once told him that Joan Collins was so over-perfumed it felt like suffocation. He swore her scent was so strong back in the 1950s that it seeped into the car's upholstery, and he actually had to get it professionally cleaned. While most of Beatty's complaints about women centered on not being clean enough, Joan was the total opposite. To him, she represented what happened when someone went too far, drowning themselves in artificial fragrance until it became almost an attack on the senses. Reynolds explained that Beatty had this strange theory. He believed a woman's scent should exist in some perfect middle zone, not too natural, not too artificial. He wanted a balance that didn't actually exist, Reynolds said. Joan Collins, in his eyes, broke that rule completely. Her perfume wasn't just noticeable, it was unforgettable. And for Beatty, that was a problem. At the 1977 industry dinner, Reynolds saw exactly how deep that sensitivity ran. Beatty and Joan crossed paths at the bar, sharing just a quick air kiss, 15 seconds, maybe less. But when Warren came back to the car hours later, the first thing out of his mouth was about her scent. He claimed he could still taste her perfume and said it gave him such a pounding headache he had to take 2 aspirin. Reynolds laughed telling the story, but it revealed something serious. Collins wasn't unhygienic by any normal standard. She just shattered Beatty's delicate idea of what perfect femininity should smell like. Julie Christie, the woman many say was the true love of Warren Beatty's life, still couldn't escape his impossible hygiene rules. Their relationship from 1967 to 1974 was his longest and most emotional one, but even love wasn't enough to protect her from his obsessive standards. Reynolds explained that this time it was different. Beatty's complaints about Julie weren't cold or judgmental. They sounded almost wounded, like he couldn't make sense of loving someone who didn't fit perfectly into his rigid world. Reynolds remembered one day vividly, picking up a jet-lagged Beatty from LAX after he'd spent time at Christie's countryside farmhouse in England. He got in the car looking completely lost, Reynolds said. After a long silence, he just muttered, "Reynolds, she's the love of my life, but not always fresh in the mornings." Beatty wasn't joking. He seemed truly thrown off. Apparently, what bothered him most was Christie's relaxed morning habits. She'd wake up, pour some coffee, read the paper, and then shower or brush her teeth. To anyone else, that's completely normal. But for Beatty, it was unthinkable. Reynolds said that small difference created ongoing tension between them, a quiet clash of lifestyles that hung in the air, even during car rides to movie sets. "I drove them to the McCabe, and Mrs. Miller set many mornings," Reynolds shared. "Sometimes the tension was so thick you could feel it before anyone spoke." Once he overheard Julie snap playfully but pointedly saying, "Not everyone needs to taste like mouthwash at 6 in the morning." That one line said it all. She wasn't bending to his rules no matter how much he loved her. From what Reynolds gathered, Julie Christie's so-called offense fell into a category that made Warren Beatty deeply uneasy: morning intimacy. Unlike casual flings he could easily dismiss for failing his hygiene rules, Christie's place in his heart made it complicated. Her habits didn't just irritate him, they confused him. Reynolds said there was a moment so rare it almost made him crash the car. Beatty actually asked for his opinion. He turned to me one morning and said, "Reynolds, do you think it's strange to shower immediately after waking up?" Reynolds laughed, remembering it. Warren Beatty asking anyone for advice? That was unheard of. It showed how much Christie had gotten under his skin. He couldn't decide if her easygoing routine was charming or disturbing. But Christie wasn't the only woman to shake up Beatty's views on cleanliness. Enter Brigitte Bardot, the ultimate symbol of French cinema and effortless sensuality. Their brief encounter during the 1965 Cannes Film Festival left Beatty in what Reynolds called a full-blown sensory crisis. "I picked him up at LAX after Cannes," Reynolds said. "He looked completely off balance, not his usual smooth, confident self at all." Before they even left the airport, Beatty launched into a long rant about what he called French hygiene habits. He was fascinated, yet horrified by what he'd just experienced, a totally different mindset about bodies, scent, and cleanliness. According to Reynolds, Beatty said Bardot once told him she believed soap was a tool of the patriarchy. That single phrase stuck with him for years. It blew his mind, the idea that something as ordinary as soap could be political. For a man obsessed with control and presentation, that encounter threw his whole world off balance. Reynolds was quick to clarify that the "soap is a tool of the patriarchy" line wasn't exactly Brigitte Bardot's wording. That was Warren Beatty's interpretation. He was clearly trying to make sense of something that completely threw him off. Reynolds said Beatty just couldn't wrap his head around how one of the world's biggest sex symbols could be comfortable with natural body odor. It was a level of self-confidence and cultural difference that totally rattled him. The real shock hit during a dinner in Cannes, where Bardot's free-spirited European attitude toward hygiene clashed head-on with Beatty's American obsession with being polished and perfect. Reynolds said Beatty described that dinner in vivid detail. Bardot had apparently come straight from a yacht trip, skipped the shower, changed her clothes, and showed up glowing and carefree. At one point during the evening, she casually lifted her arms, revealing unshaven underarms, and laughed when she caught Beatty's startled expression. For a man whose entire idea of female beauty was built on flawless grooming and total control, that moment was chaos. It broke his brain a little. "Reynolds," he kept saying later, "she's supposed to be the most beautiful woman in the world." He sounded genuinely shaken, like he couldn't reconcile her raw, natural beauty with what he viewed as a lack of hygiene. It wasn't disgust, it was confusion. That dinner shattered his old ideas of what attractive meant, forcing him to see beauty in a way that felt out of his control. According to Reynolds, their short-lived connection ended soon after a night at Bardot's Saint-Tropez home. A night that, as he put it, pushed Warren's senses past the limit. Reynolds said that after the Cannes fiasco, Warren Beatty cut his trip short, completely out of nowhere. He called me from Paris, Reynolds remembered. He sounded shaken, not his usual calm self at all. He just said, "The French approach bodies differently, Reynolds." You could tell the experience had genuinely unsettled him. Whatever happened during that whirlwind encounter left him questioning everything he thought he understood about beauty, attraction, and control. Looking back, Beatty's so-called hygiene blacklist said way more about him than about the incredible women on it. Each of those 5 legends, Madonna, Jane Fonda, Joan Collins, Julie Christie, and Brigitte Bardot, didn't actually fail his standards of cleanliness. They challenged something deeper. Each one, in her own way, went against his tight grip on what he believed women should be. Madonna's ever-changing scent was power disguised as perfume. Fonda's rejection of corporate hygiene was rebellion with purpose. Collins' perfume overload was glamour pushed to the extreme. Christie's casual morning routine was comfort over performance. And Bardot's effortless sensuality was nature itself, untamed and unapologetic. Reynolds summed it up perfectly during their final conversation. Warren wanted women who smelled like his fantasy of women, not like actual human beings. That one line cuts to the truth. It was never about soap, scent, or showers. It was about control. What Beatty couldn't handle wasn't imperfection or body odor. It was independence. Each of those women broke the rules of his world just by being real, and that, to Warren Beatty, was the biggest shock of all. These women refused to bend, refused to reshape themselves to fit Warren Beatty's impossible image of perfection. And here's the twist. After decades of chasing fantasy and judging every woman by scent, soap, and shine, karma finally flipped the script. The irony couldn't be more perfect. Reynolds said the change came when Beatty met Annette Bening, the one woman who turned his impossible standards right back on him. She made Warren worry about her opinion, Reynolds said, still sounding amazed years later. The first time I drove them, he actually asked me if the car smelled fresh enough. Imagine that. Warren Beatty, the man who spent years critiquing others, suddenly terrified of being critiqued himself. For the first time in his life, the self-proclaimed master of control became the one feeling evaluated. After decades of judging others for not meeting his hygiene code, Beatty finally understood what it was like to be measured by the same ruler he'd always held up to the women in his world. That role reversal changed everything. Hollywood's most famous bachelor became a husband who actually cared. Annette Bening didn't just capture him, she humbled him. She became the mirror he could never escape. And through her, Beatty finally learned what it meant to meet someone else's standards. If you enjoyed this wild dive into Warren Beatty's secret list and the women who challenged his world, don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and drop a comment below. Let's talk about which story shocked you the most.